There are over 12,000 people in Seattle and King County experiencing homelessness. Many of them, including families, live in vehicles. RadioActive's Michelle Aguilar Ramirez tells us what it's like to be a teenager facing the challenge of homelessness.
When I was in 8th grade, my mom and I became homeless. We lived in a car for a period. One night, we were in Renton, and the police came. Here's my mom.
I had fallen asleep and they came and knocked on my window and he flashed me with his flashlight. I was frightened by it.
It was a traumatic time. Police moved us from place to place all over South King County. I felt like I had to hide this from everyone. I felt like I deserved this. When people hear the word homeless, they make assumptions. So let me explain how this happened to us. I was born in North Carolina, but we moved a lot. I've lived in 5 states with 5 families and 5 houses. Nothing really felt like home. After my parents split up, my mother wanted to move us back to Florida to be closer to her relatives. She sold all her belongings, but there wasn't enough money to make the move. And now we had no belongings and no place to stay. Remember what you heard earlier? Yeah, that's why we ended up in that situation. I was in the passenger seat when I heard knocking. My mom woke me up. She told me to translate. The police officer told us to hurry up and leave because we were on private property. Sleeping in a car is hard for anyone, but for a 13-year-old, it's pretty difficult. This was during fall and winter. It was really cold and always raining. I remember going to sleep every night praying I would get out of this situation while shivering and shivering. Every night it was the same thing. I couldn't get comfortable, turning and tumbling. My body would ache the next day. And I couldn't do anything about it because I had no control over the situation. To get cleaned up in the mornings, we would go to the fast food places. But of course, the typical fast food place doesn't offer a place to take a shower. My mother would have to get a hotel once or twice a week to actually get cleaned up. Sometimes I would sleep over at my friends' houses, and whenever they would say, "Make yourself at home," I would take it literally. I would laugh, I would take a shower. There were pillows and blankets. I would have a roof over my head. I would feel at peace temporarily. But no one knew that I was homeless. I hid that from them. My abnormal had become normal. It was my freshman year at Renton High School, and I was still homeless. I wanted to escape, so I started to involve myself in school. I enrolled myself in honors courses. I joined clubs and sports teams. I stayed as late as I could doing homework or hanging out with friends. Anything to distract me from feeling numb, and from the fact that everything in my life was just temporary like my past. I ended up opening up about my living situation to a trusted teacher, Esther Rich.
I guess I thought, like, what I think with all of my other students is, like, why don't we offer more housing and more support?
The more I spoke up about it, the more my feelings started going away. I started to accept my reality and actually believe everything has its purpose in its own way. Rich told me about an upcoming Jobs for America's Graduates Convention and insisted I do a speech.
You're a natural leader. I wanted people to hear your story.
In that speech, I spoke about how your choices impact others no matter what. It becomes a continuous cycle. I told them because of someone else's choices, I ended up becoming homeless. It was the first time I'd said it in front of a group. I won first place public speaking and caught the ears of many. Later on, I went off to La Cima, a Latinx leadership camp. I had a chance to reflect on who I was and what I wanted in my life. And I realized this burden I carry around is not a pain I deserve. In the Latinx community, there's a sense of pride. It was hard for my mother to admit that we were homeless. She didn't even want me to do this story. She was ashamed of what we had been through. But she did have this to say.
If I would be able to give advice to someone, I would tell them, please think things through if they have kids. Don't make decisions which you'll regret later.
It was a difficult experience for my mom and me. It's not like I'm pleased I went through this, but I'm grateful because of it. I want to tell this story because the person you might least expect could be part of those 12,000 homeless people in Seattle. From RadioActive, Michelle Aguilar Ramirez.
When the Vietnam War ended, Ton Ta was on the losing side. The communist government imprisoned him, and he spent more than 5 years in re-education camps. As a way to connect with his family, he secretly wrote letters, poems, and stories. His granddaughter, RadioActive's Hong Ta, is now working to understand her family's past through these documents.
Anh nhớ em như tình nhân chưa cưới, thương mẹ cha.
That's my Noi, my grandpa. He's reciting a poem he wrote while he was in prison. When I went to interview my grandparents, their kitchen table was covered with dozens and dozens of letters and 4 entire journals filled with stories and poems.
Lời nguyện cầu nghe rõ tiếng yêu thương, hôn trên môi em thơm ngát hoa hương.
When I was in middle school, my Noi casually brought up that he had written all those documents for his family. When he was taken, he had to leave behind his 2 young sons and my grandmother, who never knew when he was going to come back.
Thì bà nội đã khóc rất là nhiều.
So I cried a lot, day after day, and another week passed, and another week passed. I never saw your grandpa come home.
My Noi was first put in a southern jail. Then he was shipped to one in the northern region, thousands of miles away from home. But my grandma kept visiting him. She bought train tickets off of the black market and took her 6 and 9-year-old sons. She smuggled in paper for him to continue writing.
Rất là kỹ ở trong những cái quần áo.
I had to hide them very carefully inside the clothes. I would sew a pocket in them to hide the journals. It was very difficult to hide the papers inside those packages of clothing.
My grandpa would fill up the journals with stories about his childhood memories, his hometown, and his family. Then he would sneak them out to her one by one so she could read the stories to their sons. I asked him what would have happened if he had been caught writing.
They
didn't allow us to write, but if they saw me writing, they would have confiscated them. They would burn them. They would have ripped them all.
But Noi never stopped. My grandpa told me he was scared of dying in the re-education camps, so he was determined to write down as much of his life as he could.
I did this because I wanted my loved ones at home, especially your grandma, and my sons to know that while I am far away, my soul and heart and love are always with my family in any situation.
My grandpa's writings have been preserved for generations. They are just one piece of the big story of Vietnamese immigrants who came to the United States after the war. I want to continue to preserve them as well. Materials like these exist in the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience.
So we have a section over here that kind of talks about different waves of immigration.
That's Jessica Rubenacher. She's the exhibit director. I showed her my Noi's letters and asked how they could contribute to the story of our Vietnamese community.
We're collecting things just like this, where it's personal stories and artifacts. But the biggest piece is that we have that personal story that really helps bring that artifact to life.
Noi would love it if his stories could be preserved.
Và nếu mà nó được dịch ra tiếng Anh thì càng tốt.
If they could be translated in English, the better, so researchers can read my journals and understand the society and history of Vietnam and what the Vietnam War was like.
Even if his writings don't end up in a museum, there is still a record of the incredible risks he and my grandma took. For that, they are my heroes. For RadioActive, this is Hong Ta.